Funding for the production of Public Square provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, working to improve the lives of vulnerable children.
I relapsed 4 times. I've had to revive people. I've had to be revived. I gave up. I got tired of trying to fight, so I might as well just stay using because there was no help for me.
I think many parents have no idea that what's being prescribed for their kids are addictive drugs that are essentially heroin in a pill.
Prescription drugs are the second most abused class of drugs in the nation.
He was a football player. He was on the golf team. His grades weren't bad. There really weren't any signs.
We went on a family vacation and we got back on Thursday. He went out with his friend Friday night and they used together and he died. I found him in his bed Saturday morning. He was dead.
Even on the day that he died, he was on the phone looking for treatment centers that could help him. What I kept hearing was, you have to allow them to hit bottom. You know, you have to allow them to hit bottom. And some addicts die on the way to the bottom.
Welcome to Public Square, where civic dialogue takes center stage, where real people come together with leaders to discuss and help solve important community issues.
As a family therapist, I get these phone calls from parents who've just learned that their kids are smoking or injecting heroin, and they're, devastated doesn't even cover it.
Today we're looking at a new twist on an old problem. Shocking numbers of young people in New Mexico are becoming addicted to prescription painkillers. And after a while, many of these teens move on to heroin, which is cheaper and easier to get than the pills. We'll hear painful stories firsthand from recovering addicts and from parents whose children have died from overdoses. After that, we'll talk about what can be done to turn this problem around. We'll hear from Albuquerque Mayor Richard Berry, New Mexico's Secretary of Health Dr. Catherine Torres, State Senator Dee Dee Feldman, and Keith Brown, the head of the Drug Enforcement Agency in New Mexico. Before we get started, here's a little bit more about our topic.
It was a shock to me. I didn't know that heroin, much less opiate addiction or addiction to prescription drugs, was a problem in our communities until my son had become addicted to heroin through prescription drugs. It really opened my eyes to how big the problem really is.
Although New Mexico has long been known for a serious heroin abuse problem, the situation has recently taken a sharp turn. In Albuquerque, the deaths of several high school students have shocked a community that was mostly unaware its teenagers had been toying with dangerous street drugs.
You know, I'm not what this typical stereotype of a heroin addict looks like.
Over the last 20 years, the state has had a steady and saddeningly high rate of drug overdoses. But now more and more young people are becoming addicted to prescription pain medications and to heroin and dying from them.
It's no longer just some heroin addict, some deviant in an alley somewhere. It's my child, it's your child.
Compared to the national average, New Mexico high school students are nearly twice as likely to have tried heroin. As it is, we have the second highest rate of drug-induced deaths in the nation.
I lost my son to heroin addiction a little over a year ago. I didn't know a lot about the disease of addiction.
Compounding the problem, withdrawal symptoms of heroin addiction are brutal, and many addicts can't quit without help. There are no detox facilities in Albuquerque for teenagers, though, and many teens who seek help are turned away.
It's imperative that we get some sort of adolescent treatment in New Mexico. There is no detox, there is no treatment for adolescents.
Private programs farther away can be extremely expensive, out of the reach of most families. Even families with excellent health insurance find themselves frustrated by a lack of options.
The number of overdose death rates now outnumber the number of traffic fatalities. We have to change, our system, and we have to support our youth.
So we need to work together to beat this problem. I just can't even imagine if we don't address this. I think it's important to allow parents to not be ashamed to come forward and say, my child has a problem, and for a community to rally behind them to get that child help.
I want to thank you all for being with us here today. Let's start this conversation by talking to those of you who are in recovery now. Samantha, can you talk to us about the first time you used heroin?
I was
20 years old, and I was just trying to get off of Oxycontin just because it was too expensive. I couldn't afford it. And I started doing heroin with my friend, and then it just kind of slowly progressed from, you know, spending $20 and spending $60 a day, and then just continued up to 6 grams a day.
Was it fun?
It was fun in the beginning. I don't really know. I guess the way I consider it fun was that I didn't have to be conscious for any problems in my life. And the fun part of that was that my mind finally got a chance to rest, and I didn't have to worry about anything.
Were there parts of it that were not fun?
There were lots of parts of it that were not fun. One of which I distinctly remember was totaling my truck last year. I ended up hit a family of 6 in an SUV, and because I had passed out behind the wheel after I was using. And one of the other distinct times that I can remember that was not fun was when I got an abscess on my arm and I had to have it cut open.
Maurice?
The first time I used heroin, I got it from my mom because I knew she had been using and I was getting sick. I didn't have any pills and I was sick, and she gave it to me. And none of it was ever really fun for me except for the fact that I didn't have to feel. You know, I didn't have to feel my problems. I lost a sister to a methadone overdose, and I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to deal with life, and so I numbed myself. And waking up sick, that was the first time I knew that I was addicted, was when I woke up sick. And from then on, it was just, you know, doing whatever I had to do to stay well, to be able to not wake up or to be able to get out of bed, basically. And it was probably the hardest thing for me because I didn't want to be an addict. I didn't want to use drugs. And I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to get away from it. I didn't know about the treatment facilities in the state. I didn't know that about any of the information. And it took my sister calling and telling my probation officer that I was using heroin for me to get a moment of clarity and for me to finally stop using. And I've been clean for 18 months.
What does it feel like to wake up sick?
It's the worst physical pain. There's vomiting, diarrhea, cold sweats, chills. Your bones hurt like no other pain I've ever felt. It's probably the worst pain that I've ever gone through. I mean, withdrawals cause hallucinations and things like that, and it's terrifying. The main reason that kept me from getting clean was fear of withdrawals.
Does that sound familiar?
I needed something to simply get up out of bed. It wasn't like, oh, just let me wake up and let me go downstairs. It was, let me reach over to my heroin so I can sit up in bed and, you know, quit shaking and just quit. I wasn't able to sit still, and I recall a time where my mom finally witnessed me withdrawing, and I was pacing around the entire bottom of our house, like the ground floor of our house. I was just pacing back and forth all around the entire house because I couldn't sit still, and I was just shaking. And, you know, like she said, it's the worst pain that I've ever felt. I couldn't do anything without first feeling normal by using heroin. It wasn't even about getting high after a while. It was because I had to use it, otherwise I would get sick, and it would just be horrible, just like she described.
What I've heard is it starts with the pills.
You know, at first it starts with the pills, and you snort them, and then you smoke them. I mean, you can shoot pills as well. But for me, it went from snorting the pills, smoking the pills, then smoking the heroin, then shooting the heroin, and then mixing the heroin with cocaine and with meth and with whatever else I could.
Is that what it sounded like for you?
Yeah, it was easy for me, I guess, because I did it with my family. I did it with both my parents and my little brother, and Like, my parents never wanted help, and so it made it really hard for me to want help.
We got a lot of parents here today. I want to hear from you guys about how you found out, how you first knew that something was wrong.
2 days after Christmas, I had the police at my front door, and to let me know that my son had attempted to break into a house. And it took the police standing in my kitchen with my son at the kitchen table for a couple of hours before he finally admitted that he was addicted to Oxy. You know, before that, he probably had about a year of using Oxy. And with him around, with his friends around the house, you know, all the time, very involved parents. He was a baseball player in high school. And he managed to live a normal life being on the drug. And for the police to come to my door, that was my first inclination.
Jennifer? My son was using for about 6 months before I found out. He started out very mildly using painkillers for 2 sports-related injuries, and he had surgery on one of his collarbones, broke his collarbone, and was prescribed Percocet, I believe. And so he had told me later, once I figured out what was going on, that he loved the way that those pills made him feel. And I don't know that he was ever addicted to pills, but he very quickly started, he was at a party and one of his really good friends was smoking heroin, and so he tried it for the first time. And he used it sporadically for about 2 months, and then after that he was addicted. So I found out about 6 months after he started for the first time, and I just found out because I knew something was wrong, and I kept trying to figure out what it was that was wrong with him. And a lot of the warning signs were typical adolescent warning signs: behavior, disappearing for hours, he wouldn't return my phone calls, he was sleepy all the time, his sleep patterns were disrupted, he was angry, you know, there were violent mood swings, things like that. And so I attributed a lot of that to just adolescence, because he was 16 at the time. And I finally took him to a therapist, and she was able to pinpoint the problem, and he admitted at that point that he was using heroin, but by that time he was already addicted.
I think with my son, he started using Oxy as well in high school for a sports-related injury, and I could tell that something was wrong, and I found a text where he had asked his friend for the pills, and so then I confronted him, and he admitted that he was taking them, and he had taken a couple, and so I told him, no more, we're not doing this. And then 2 weeks later, of course, he had his wisdom teeth taken out, and what did they prescribe but Oxy, and he went through 20 Oxy in about 2 days. And so I thought that we had taken care of the problem after that, and like Lou said, he was active in school, he was a straight A student, he didn't have any of the warning signs, but the heavy use really started when he went down to college in Las Cruces. And every time he would come home, we could see a very definite change in his personality, and we could not figure out what it was. And even after he got to the point where he looked like death's door, and we went down to Las Cruces to get him, on the way home, I still had it in my head that it was Oxy. And we put him in rehab, and I think he had been in rehab, he had gone through detox and had been in rehab for 2 weeks before he finally came clean and said, I was doing heroin. And I was like, really shocked me. It was just not even on our radar. If he had said coke or if he had said meth, I think that I would have been less surprised. I was really just shocked. It was not a word that was in my vocabulary. It wasn't, it was that dirty back alley drug, and I didn't even think you could get it anymore, or if you did, it wasn't at a college campus. I think it's really just important to note that not all kids have the typical 10 symptoms of, missing school and bad grades and change of friends.
Steve, did your son show warning signs?
I think, like Jennifer said, I attributed a lot of his behavior to adolescence. I didn't have to really ask whether my son was using or what he was using. He called me up one afternoon and said that he needed to go to the doctor. He wanted some help. And I asked him what it was about, and he just kind of confessed to me. That began this odyssey of looking for services, trying to find the best treatment, my own understanding of what addiction was and is. I didn't know in the beginning that how gripping opiate addiction is. And watching my son fight the addiction really caused me to think differently about addiction and really chemical dependence. And I don't think so much anymore that it's about behavior. You know, my son actually understood the disease a lot better than I did. And he literally prepared me and let me know, although he fought like hell, you know, to beat the illness, he let me know that he might not make it. How does a parent handle when they find out that their child has cancer or when their child has any other disease? You know, you don't want to know, or you don't want to even think about what the most negative outcome might be. And so, you know, you try not to think about it, but in the end he overdosed. That's essentially what happened. You know, I looked for answers, tried to figure out ways to help. What I kept hearing was, you have to allow them to hit bottom. You know, you have to allow them to hit bottom. And some addicts die on the way to the bottom, I guess, is the only thing I can come up with, you know.
Jennifer, what happened with your son?
He overdosed as well. He had been clean off and on sporadically for about 6 months, so his body had pretty much gotten accustomed to not having the drug in it. And they say that is when the majority of overdoses happen with opiates, is when you're clean for a certain period of time, your body loses the tolerance to process the drug. So when you go back to use, if you use too much, your body can't handle it and you end up overdosing. And that's what happened with my son. He got out of jail, we went on a family vacation. We got back on Thursday. He went out with his friend Friday night and they used together, and he died. I found him in his bed Saturday morning. He was dead. He died about 3:30 in the morning.
That's a similar story. I mean, my son, he was in and out of treatment. He would be clean for a while, and he would be the son that I remember. And I guess that's the thing about heroin, or what I've learned about heroin anyway, is that an individual can use the same amount or the same dose, and then next day that dose will kill them. And I think that's what's so dangerous about it, is because, you know, even on the day that he died, he was on the phone looking for treatment centers that could help him. And it was just a matter of, I guess he used once too many.
It's like Russian roulette. They just never know. It's just that one time is all it takes. And they don't go out that night planning to die. I mean, you know, my son, when his friend dropped him off at the house at 3 o'clock in the morning, he said he was fine. He said he was coherent, he was awake, he was alert, he was fine. And he didn't use it home. So he got home, and when he went to sleep, I think it slowed his respiratory system down, because he had so much drug so much of the drug in his body, it slowed his respiratory system down, and he basically suffocated.
They cheat death several times before it actually takes them.
My son's friend told me after he passed away how many times they had resuscitated each other and how many times they cheated death, that they knew what to do. I mean, they're very rudimentary things that they do, but they know how the drug affects their system. They know it lowers their blood pressure. They know it causes certain things that bring them to the brink of death. And so they splash cold water on their faces, they make each other walk around, they do whatever they think they can do to bring each other essentially back from the brink of death.
I want to talk for a minute about, what leads kids to do this.
There are a couple different things going on. Right now, the systems that support our kids, the systems that are there for them, are really stretched very, very thin. And many of the kids I work with end up feeling like they can't even get a teacher's attention, and what attention they get is negative. A lot of the messages coming from our society are pretty heavy. The outcome of a lot of young people's futures. What do I have to look forward to? Is the planet going to be there for me to live on in the first place? Can I get a job? Am I going to be saddled with debt out of high school, out of college? Will a high school diploma do anything for me? That and the fact that prescription drugs are the second most abused class of drugs, according to NIH, in the nation, right? And so, again, you kind of add all that to the pot. You're feeling stressed. You're feeling like you don't know what to do with all the hormonal stuff that's going on, and someone says, just try this. All you got to do is smoke it. It's not going to hurt you. And you're there. And that instant gratification is so what we want when we're 15, 16, 17 years old.
I also kind of think that it's become a party drug. You hear of these farming parties. And when we grew up, it was alcohol, maybe a couple people smoked. But, for Michael, it was someone just offering him an oxy, and he took it. And he took it with some other friends, and he was the only one that really liked it, and the others, didn't. So it's a new generation as well, because, a lot of these kids were in private school, so their classrooms weren't overfilled. They had 15 kids in the class. So, I think there's a whole generation of, both of our boys were the athletes, and injuries were involved, and then that one pill was introduced to you, and then Michael had an injury, so he had access to 2 refills of oxy from a knee injury. I just also think it's the new party drug. It's not sometimes just to escape or to feel good. I think it's just if you're predisposed to be an addict and you're offered and you like it, you can come home, you don't smell like you've been smoking, it's not like you're drunk. So you're able to come home and function, and your parents don't know that you're using oxy. My son did that for over a year.
It creates its own cycle, right? Because even if they don't come to it from that more negative way, I think what happens, and you guys can confirm or disconfirm this, but I think what happens for a lot of young people is no matter how you get there, you use, and then everything goes away, right? And if you end up noticing that you really like that, you got those 2 people on your shoulders, right? The one person saying, wow, that was cool, and the other person saying, dude, you can't do that again. That's not going to work out for you. And so taking it again makes that guy go away, right? And so before you know it, you're struggling with needing to check out just because dealing with the reality. You're either worried that it's going to hurt like hell, or you're worried that the people in your life are just, the bottom's going to fall out for them.
Well, that and being an addict, once I put one substance in me, my brain is wants more and more and more and more and more, and it doesn't stop until it gets it. When I take any substance, whether it be drug, like alcohol, heroin, methamphetamines, or anything, the obsession is almost overpowering to where I have no other choice but to do that.
Well, then I agree with Meg in the fact that my brain keeps finding reasons for me to be able to use a different drug or to go explore different drugs, because suddenly I've lost that fear that I will die.
Being a teenager hasn't changed that much over generations, in that it's always a time of a combination of joys and miseries, Things are really fun and things are really terrible, and we often want to escape from that. But what has changed dramatically, Dr. K, is the prescription drugs that we've got in our parents' medicine cabinets. I don't think farming was unfamiliar to kids in the 90s or in the 80s, but what they farmed was different. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, there's been just an explosion in prescribing of opiate pain pills in this country, and the overdose rate parallels it. If you look at the graph of how opiate prescriptions goes up, overdoses are right there. So this isn't a foreign or imported problem. This is a domestic problem. And I think it goes back to in the 90s, there was a huge push in the world of medicine to define pain as something that had to be treated at all costs in all cases. And it came from a very good, beneficent point of view, wanting to get rid of pain and help people who are in pain, but the most effective pain medication we have for acute pain is opiates. And I think it sort of inevitably led to a redefining of all pain as unacceptable and a need to treat all pain without really a recognition for what the potential consequences down the line might be. And it's, I guess with 20/20 hindsight, we certainly could have predicted it. But, and a lot of other trends within medicine. If you're a doctor and someone comes in complaining of back pain, what's faster, to write them a prescription for Percocet or to do a extensive physical exam and workup of why they have the pain? And so, when you work for a medical organization that requires that you see a patient every 12 minutes, every 15 minutes, and you're dealing with their 5 other problems along with their pain, it's it's easy to do, it's quick, and it's what the patient expects. Our society expects that all pain will be treated, and we've just created a horrible mess.
Is there a way out of that?
Well, I think what we're doing today is an attempt at that, at redefining, helping people to recognize the risks of what we've created, and I think you have to create awareness before you're going to create any kind of political will for change. I think that's the work that all of us are engaged in, is trying to say we need to stop and take a cold, hard look at what's going on here and make some radical changes to try and get a handle on this problem.
So, if we're talking to parents who have kids who are athletes, who are, breaking collarbones, do you recommend that parents talk to their kids about when they're in the doctor's office, do you really need this pain medication?
Well, I think that is an appropriate step to sort of say, do we really need a prescription for an opiate for whatever this problem is? I think many parents have no idea that what's being prescribed for their kids are addictive drugs that are essentially heroin in a pill. I think many kids don't know it, although more of the kids know it than the adults do in this climate. And I think physicians are incredibly irresponsible about the quantities and the number of refills that we prescribe. Again, not through malice. I don't think anybody's out there saying, I'm going to get some kids addicted today. But it's just become kind of a knee-jerk part of our society, our expectations, the way we approach pain and medical problems. Just take a pill, it'll take care of it.
I have a colleague who went to the urgent care for strep throat and came out with prescription strength Tylenol and antibiotics and 20 Vicodin.
There's some fear that was created back when the organization that accredits healthcare institutions, JCAHO, said in the late 90s, early 2000s that we had to treat pain, and in fact, physicians were getting literally sued for inadequate pain treatment. Pain became defined as the 5th vital sign that you need to ask every patient, do they have pain, and whatever that pain is, you got to take it down, down to 0. And I mean, how else do you do that?
It's out there. It's in so many medicine cabinets. You can go to anybody's house and look in their medicine cabinet, and you'll see something. What do you think needs to change?
They need to have some sort of process or some sort of something in place to where it's harder to get prescription drugs, because it was so easy for me to go to a walk-in pain clinic or to go over here and see this doctor and get multiple prescriptions at once. They just give you what you ask for.
We need to target people at a younger age, because a lot of people that I know in recovery are 15 and 14.
Yeah. Reality-based education is so critical. We have to respect our youth and give them the support and the services and the information and the knowledge to make informed, safe decisions.
This is a public health issue. I mean, we are losing kids at a rate that far exceeds, at least from my observational experience, I won't quote anything here, but that far exceeds the flu. And yet, you can't go into a middle school and present a reality-based education program and not have about heroin and opiates and not have the parents go, oh my God, what are you teaching my kid?
quite honestly, if somebody said, we're going to come talk to your little fourth grader about heroin and opiate addiction, the old me would freak out. But I think the reality is that we have to be candid and we have to talk openly and we have to educate the kids and the families, because the families don't know what to look for. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a huge conundrum to figure out how to do effective education around this, because there is a whole element of, the more scary you make it sound, the more attractive it is. But I guess I just really want to echo what Emily said, that I think that the evidence that there is out there suggests that real, honest, open discussion, not just of the harms of the drug, but the legal consequences, I think sometimes that can make an impact on young people when they really understand, how few steps it is between here and jail when you're involved with these drugs. And then a lot of kids don't understand that once you have a felony on your record, no one's going to rent to you, no one's going to hire you. The most likely next step is to go back to prison.
Back to what Dr. K had said, we created this society that it's okay to pop a pill for everything. And now the result is all of these kids are addicted to this drug that they have no idea what it does to their lives, their families' lives, and then once they're in it, it's so incredibly hard to get out of it and to proceed with their normal life.
Well, let's bring in the other group and we'll start talking about some solutions. Secretary Torres, one of the problems we've just been talking about is the fact that there are so many more prescription drugs out there on the street. You're a pediatrician, you've got some experience in this area. What can the state do to try to help keep some of these prescription drugs off the street?
The Heroin Awareness Committee really wants us to work on a 7-day prescription of pain medication for both adolescents and for adults. We also are looking at limiting the number of refills. We are asking for education for providers so that providers are better informed of what they're prescribing.
The Board of Pharmacy is really aggressively trying to make that almost a real-time database so that the doctors, they have a patient walk in, they get a funny feel about the patient, they can see if in the last week the patient's been to see 3 or 4 other doctors for the same things. So that's another great thing that the state has done, is trying to modernize that so the physicians get real-time information and it cuts down on the doctor shopping that goes on sometimes.
Does the technology exist already so that the senator and so our mayor can just say it needs to be done?
Yes.
What they want to get to is being able to do that daily. It won't be every hour, but to daily, and that takes some new software. Also, it takes, the pharmacist has to put in that input. So the transaction of that can cost money to the pharmacy as well. So we're trying to develop a system that providers can use and the pharmacists can use.
Agent Brown, are you tracking doctors who are writing too many prescriptions?
We investigate doctors that write too many prescriptions, but it becomes difficult because if their practice is the management of pain, and there's a lot of people out there in severe pain, that becomes more problematic because it's difficult to tell just from a prescription number what the actual situation is.
One thing that could really help too is if we had more take-back programs. In other words, there's a lot of unused medication that's already out there, regardless of what the Prescription Monitoring Project does. So I know that the city of Albuquerque has been doing some take-back programs so that they're not just lying around.
Mayor, do you know the details on that?
Well, we have a program like that, but what we're trying, and that's something that we can continue. I think education is an important part of that. If people don't know that service is available, then they're less likely to use it. At the city level, we really approach this from a number of different vectors, if you will. We've got a law enforcement vector, working with the school systems even in trying to identify sourcing for this. One of the things that we've been able to do that I think is very meaningful is work with Jennifer and make sure that people understand what the treatment options are, where they are, and how they can become more readily accessible. And then I think sometimes as a mayor, as elected official, you have a little bit of a bully pulpit, and I can stand up and I can say, look, I'm not just the mayor of Albuquerque, I'm the father of a high school freshman. We're all interested in this process, and it's okay for us as a community to talk about this and not take this head in the sand attitude where it's embarrassing for somebody or we think it looks bad on the city or the state of New Mexico to have a candid conversation about a real problem.
Do you think, Mayor, that Albuquerque Public Schools should be talking more about these subjects in classrooms?
Well, I can tell you, I really want to take my hat off to Principal Resch at La Cueva High School. He was one of the first principals that said, look, if you're going to be in a student activity, you're going to come to a student assembly. And I went to that student assembly and I sat there. Jennifer Weiss spoke about her experiences. We had recovering addicts talking about their experiences. And that takes a lot of spine, if you will, for a principal of a school to say, we're willing to talk about this. I would certainly hope that other principals, the administration at APS would feel the same way, which I believe they do because they are active in our working groups.
On a side note, Samantha has joined me at local high schools, and we often ask the question, how many of you have been personally affected by someone who has died of a heroin overdose? And oftentimes half of the kids will raise their hand. So, the kids know it's there. They know, for 50% of them to know someone who has died, it's in our schools.
And I can't agree more that we have to stop treating this as a moral failure, and there are solutions that have been proven to work. And one of the other things I just add in these factors is talking about harm reduction and how do we reduce the harm so that our children have a second chance. We haven't talked about the drug Narcan tonight that really does, it's a drug that reverses an overdose, just like an EpiPen for an allergic reaction. And so how do we get that in the hands of New Mexicans and families and teach people how to use that? Because that can really change and save a life.
The EMTs are carrying this now, right?
But we already do that here. We were one of the first states, and
that's right.
We've been pioneers, so I would...
And let's expand that. Let's figure out how we can get that into the hands of more people. And we also were the first state to pass the Good Samaritan bill in the nation. So that means that if someone is witnessing an overdose, they're not fearful to call 911.
I just want to say there's been 9,000 people trained since 2001, and 3,000 documented overdose reversals, which this state was very pioneer in doing. So
that's incredible, but they can't get into the hands of it if you're a minor. If you're under 18, you don't have access to that. You don't have access to safe needles, and you don't have access to the Narcan pens. You can't get it. So how are you supposed to protect yourself if you're using underage?
And most teenagers do not know about the Good Samaritan law, whether it exists or not. And so I do think that those two things are really, really important.
Well, I have a question about access. Has there been any discussion at the department level about an individual that can prescribe opiates? Should they also be mandated, perhaps, to prescribe Suboxone? So if they're going to treat pain or if they're going to prescribe opiates, should they also have in their toolbox the abilities to prescribe Suboxone or something?
Well, Steve, we did meet with everyone that prescribed Suboxone in Bernalillo County.
How many people is that?
Well, my understanding is there's about 95 that have certified, but not that many actually do it because it is something that you really need to understand who you're treating. I think you bring up a good point that those who prescribe opioids probably need to know to prescribe Suboxone as well.
And we need to make sure that Medicaid is reimbursing the doctors for Suboxone, and that's how I met Steve and Jennifer when they came before the legislature and said that we can't get access for our kids for this really important and remarkable method. So we've learned a lot in the legislature about this. We've been leaders in harm reduction dating back to the 1990s with needle exchange. And now, though, what we're learning through all these task forces that have been set up is that we really need a paradigm shift and to look at this, as Steve was saying, as a chronic disease, something that we need to treat and treat as part of primary care, and you know, there are no treatment programs for adolescents in New Mexico. We got to say this. This is serious. Even folks that want to recover can't do it.
I spent 6 hours the first night that my son went through withdrawals trying to find a place to take my son. We don't have those type of resources. How many task forces do you need? How many studies do you need? It's there. It's been said. It's been done. Our children are dying. We need a place where our children can, or in the youth, can walk in, get detoxed, and not be treated like a second-rate citizen. I took my son to the emergency room one time and was treated very much like part of his, you know, the whole drug world, and my teenage daughter as well, and my husband. And you know, we need a facility that our children could walk into.
And Lou, I'm not saying that we just need more task forces. What I'm saying is that there's not a best practice. We've looked at a pilot project with Jennifer and some others of looking at a facility, even looking at the facility in Roswell, creating that to be all adolescents. The governor is very much behind a pilot project. Heroin has been around in New Mexico for a long period of time, and we don't want to keep making the same mistake. And I think what we're looking at is deciding who do we need if we have a pilot project, who are the right people. And that's what I get from the Heroin Awareness Committee is they're ready for some change, they're ready to move forward, but they also want to make sure that we're putting dollars in the right place. And I think it's true of the legislators as well.
Is there anything you need more than a little bit more time to make a treatment facility available to young people?
What do I need? I really need the ability to spend time, really sit down and say, what is it that's going to work?
Any issue, the needs are greater than the resources. So that's why it's so vitally important in this particular issue that we dovetail our resources and our expertise together. And the state, I think, is in a position to really take that leadership role, working with our working group, helping us take our resources, putting those in the right places so that we then have a meaningful solution. If we don't do that, we're just going to end up with another task force, and that's not what I want to be part of. And I don't think anybody at this round table wants to be part of that either.
As a family therapist, I get these phone calls from parents who've just learned that their kids are smoking or injecting heroin, and they're, devastated doesn't even cover it. Okay, and then if they've tried a couple things before they get to me, they feel like people are just slamming doors in their face. The emergency room conversation. I don't know how many parents I've talked to who go to an emergency room and they're just sent away. The kid doesn't even get an evaluation. You don't need a hospital to detox. Go away. And what I really like about what the mayor has set up is we're planning and coordinating and researching best practice, and at the same time trying to link what exists and make it work well so a parent can call one place.
The first time I wanted to get clean, I did not want to use anymore. And so all I could think of to do, because I didn't have any resources, I didn't know where to go, was to open the phone book. And I looked, rehab. There's nothing in there. It's all like joint rehabilitation, physical therapy. There's nothing in there. And then I didn't know where else to go, so I went to the public health office and I tried to get on Suboxone, and it was the hardest thing that I had tried to do, on waiting list after waiting list after waiting list after denial after just jumping through hoops. I gave up. I got tired of trying to fight, so I might as well just stay using because there was no help for me.
Mayor, if I called 311 right now and said, I just found out my son is a heroin addict, where can I get him help? Where would the 311 operator send me today? They're
going to have difficulty today because we don't have, this is what the working group is trying to do. We're trying to set up a pathway so that then we can educate our 311 staff, and it's not just 311, but anybody. And it's not just a government issue. This is a situation and a problem the private sector has a lot of capabilities. There are families out there that certainly would rely on Medicaid for treatment, but there are certainly families out there that could pull out their checkbook and pay today. So it's not just a government solution. I think we're going to have to bring the private sector into the solution and bring people in who make it their day-to-day business of working on this as well.
How did your family pay for rehab for your son?
We paid, detox was not covered, so that was paid out of pocket. Then he did inpatient, which was about $12,000, which was paid by insurance. And luckily I have the drug writer on my insurance, or my employer does. And then he did sober living, where he actually lived there, and that is $140 a day where he was at, and insurance paid $110 of it.
I paid $35,000 for my son to go to rehab out of pocket. $35,000.
What's the best way for parents to find out how to help their kids now? Right now.
We call somebody you know. You call your network of
call
friends.
Someone you know.
We have a list when a parent calls.
Call the Heroin
That's why
Awareness
we're
Committee.
doing
That's
what
the
we're
best
doing.
way.
That's why, there's one common theme here, and it's urgency.
Is there a list of resources on the city or the state's website anywhere?
We have a list of resources on the Heroin Awareness Committee's website. It's
Heroin Awareness Committee's
but it's still a puzzle.
website?
It's still a puzzle.
Right.
And I think what we're trying to do is put that puzzle together for people on the front end, so that when you find yourself in a situation of dire need, somebody's taken the time to do that, and somebody's taken their personal experiences, their resources from the state level, from the city, county, and try to put those together and have a meaningful pathway for people, on top of trying to keep people from getting into the situation in the first place.
Well, I agree, all of you are right. By word of mouth is how most people learn to get help. They don't really, or they get thrown into jail, and then they are forced into something, and that's how they get help. I don't really...
That was my situation.
No, jail is the wrong place.
Right.
Well, that's how I got clean. I got thrown in jail for a period of time, and the moment of clarity, I was able to come to and have some clarity and apply for treatment centers. And I was fortunate enough to be put in a treatment center, a long-term treatment center, and I was there for 6 months. And then as soon as I left that treatment center, it lost funding. And so a big issue is funding, money. We don't have money.
People that have a disease, we're incarcerating them. Is there a way, and it's a question, that we can shift some of those resources that we spend incarcerating our young people and incarcerating people with a disease, and shift those dollars into treatment, into educating? And so one of the questions I would love to see the state sort of tackle is, how do we really prioritize alternatives to incarceration, treatment instead of incarceration?
We passed a bill last time in the session, treatment instead of incarceration. It was vetoed. So I'm not exactly sure where to go from there, but that's a magic moment for people, either when they're incarcerated or when they're just getting out. And it seems like so many of the overdoses come when people are just getting out of prison or out of jail. And it seems like we need to be focusing on that moment in order to bring down our really horrible statistics here. This is 2.5 times the national level of deaths from overdoses in both prescription drugs and in heroin. So that seems to be sort of the pragmatic thing that I think might answer some of the frustration we hear from advocates who are, on the receiving end as we study, as we come up with the best practices, as we try something out in a pilot project.
Is there any treatment in incarceration? Is there any counseling
They
for
have
addicts?
they have programs. They have like the program pods where you can go, but you have to sign up for them or you have to be court mandated there. I tried when I was incarcerated to get into one of those programs, and the waiting list was huge. I was like, if I'm going to be in here, I might as well do something with my time, and I wanted to stay clean.
Well, what about for the people that don't get the wake-up call of being in jail? Like, I was never arrested. I never got arrested, which was good, but at the same time, I did have to go to rehab twice. I relapsed 4 times. I've had to revive people. I've had to be revived. And, there's no real way to just impact it into someone's head that this is not a good idea.
What would have mattered early for you? And that's one of the things that we're talking
What
about.
would have mattered early for me, I think, would have been a less scare tactic way of approaching drugs. Like, how I mentioned earlier, I was scared. I was like, oh my God, this person died from the first usage of ecstasy. And then I tried it. I had a weird night, but I didn't die.
So did you feel like you were talked to as an adult? That's one of the things I'm trying to key on.
Not at all.
My son's 15. If I talk to him and if I placate him and I talk to him like a child, he's going to react as a child. If I talk to him and give him good information, candid, straightforward talk as an adult, I feel like he or anybody would respond better. Am I on base there? Or not?
Well, no, the scary thing about opiates is that you don't understand that you're addicted until you wake up sick one day. Like it's like such a slippery slope that you take a pill every once in a while, you take a pill here, you take a pill there, and then you move from prescription medication to heroin, or you start smoking it with your friends at a party, and you don't realize that it's heroin until you're smoking it every day with your friends.
Jennifer said, if I hear a common theme too, if I knew then what I know now.
I personally think when they do the 9th grade orientation of the 8th graders coming into the high school, there should be an element there as well, because you have the parents kind of as a captive audience in the gym, on the bleachers, listening to the principal talking about the incoming freshmen. That could make a huge impact.
If we're going to come up with a list of 5 things that need to happen right away, that are the most important things, what should those 5 things be?
Straight talk, not scared straight.
Resource availability. Access to treatment.
Access to syringe exchange programs and Narcan for young people.
And long-term aftercare.
Education, awareness.
Absolutely, the long-term
intensive
aftercare,
outpatient
because once they get out of rehab, 30 days, it's like, okay, you're on your own, go find an NA group or go do whatever.
Well, when I got arrested, they gave me the option. They said, you can go to 28-day in jail or you can find treatment. I said, 28 days is not going to keep me clean. And I knew that. But I didn't have any other resources outside of what they gave me in there. Now, when I left, they didn't hand me an NA pamphlet. They didn't say, go to a meeting here. They didn't say, here's a treatment list. They didn't give me a list of treatment centers in Albuquerque or in New Mexico or anything like that. They said, good luck.
There just aren't the treatment resources there for many people. I mean, in my work at Turquoise Lodge, where we run an urgent care in collaboration with the county, we treated 5,000 people last year who were coming in seeking treatment. And we can do a brief detox. I have dozens of people come in every week asking for treatment for opiate addiction, and there are very, very few places to send them in this city or in this state. In the last 6 years, through UNM's Project ECHO, I've trained 225 physicians in the use of buprenorphine. Most of them don't actually prescribe it. They don't have the adequate support. They don't really feel like this is their job. The community's not really calling on them to do it, and yet that's a medical treatment that is profoundly effective, and it should be available in every primary care office in this state.
If I were to do anything over again, I would educate myself about addiction and then how I can best support a loved one who's an addict. Yeah. Because for a long time, I struggled, I pulled my hair out about what did I do wrong, one. Why didn't I talk to him about this particular thing? What can I do to stop it? Why can't he just stop? Can he see what he's doing to us? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that my son really helped me with was, he said, Dad, you're not an addict. Mm-hmm. You don't know why. We do things that we would never do. I'm doing things that I thought I would never do. But it's because I'm an addict. That's why. And my number one priority isn't your happiness. It's not your safety. It's not anyone's safety. It's that next fix. That's my number one priority. I don't care what society thinks about me. I don't care if I'm living on the street. That doesn't matter. As a parent, what do you have to accept to let your child walk around with Narcan in their pocket? You know, you have to say to yourself, am I enabling this? Am I enabling my son? Am I giving him permission to use heroin? At the same time, just like with any other disease, what do we do as loved ones to help our loved one, struggle with a particular disease? And I think addiction has such a negative stigma that goes along with it that we have to overcome some obstacles that we wouldn't have to overcome if it was another disease. And I would think maybe number 5, maybe it's number 6. I don't know. But I went through a transformation as a father of an addict. And I think as a community generally, we're going to have to go through a transformation as a community and say, it's okay if you're an addict. If you're an addict, there are ways that are more effective than others to get the help that you need.
Steve, thank you. Thank you to all the parents. Thank you to you young people for sharing your stories. They were painful and honest and brave. We really appreciate it.
It's really special to me to be able to come here and reach out and hopefully help somebody that's suffering with addiction or that has a family member that's suffering.
This forum where you bring law enforcement and elected officials and doctors and parents and kids together, we got to do more of it.
As a parent who's lost a child, I want to hurry up and get this done.
I've been involved in addiction treatment in New Mexico for about 7 years, and I've never seen this level of interest in actual action planning. It feels like a real sea change.
What I hope we do is we treat our children with respect. We give them access to the services our adults get.
We would never dream of treating somebody who had diabetes or chronic heart failure the same way we treat somebody with an addiction. There's a big paradigm shift that has to happen.
These kids, like Maurice was talking about, she wanted to do this on her own. I find it almost impossible for these kids to do it on their own because I, as a coherent adult, couldn't even get it done for my daughter. I don't know how, in the throes of addiction, someone can get it done.
Most addicts want to stop. As a community, we need to provide the opportunities to give them the tools to stop.
This can happen to anybody, and so don't assume that it can't happen to you, and don't assume it's not in your kids' school. Talk to your kids. Sit down and ask them. Don't ask them about heroin. Ask them about prescription drugs. Ask them about pills. Ask them about the things that they're seeing in their school. Just ask them. Have a casual conversation. I think you'd be shocked at what you hear.
Join us for Public Square on the last Thursday of every month. To participate in Public Square and for more information, go to our website, knme.org/Public Square. Here you can give us feedback or suggest topics for future shows. Also, look for us on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you for watching.